help this kid be the best kid that they can be. In regards to the special detention cases, those are cases like probation violations, aftercare violations. Now, when both sides did the detention realization study, they made up probably 75% of the population. It's those situations where you had a CSO, court service officer, or JCA, juvenile corrections agent, get a call in the middle of the night, 3 o'clock in the morning, and say, well, hold him in detention, I'll deal with it tomorrow. Because they didn't have anything else. So by looking and implementing the JDAI process, they were able to kind of get some more tools for their toolbox. So their only tool was not detention. So both agencies have implemented a by implementing the risk assessment instrument, they can base their decisions and their next steps on facts, and they can also use a graduated response grid. Now, the graduated response grids have already been in place for a very long time, but what the JDI process did was make sure that court service officer or juvenile corrections agent over here had the same response as the one that did over here. So there wasn't even, so it eliminated the justice by geography within one agency, within one office. So that was able to help kids in the long run as well. I've talked about reducing racial and ethnic disparities, and it helps with the compliance with the Federal Juvenile Justice and Emergency Prevention Act. And then the conditions of confinement. That is something that obviously new sites that don't have a detention center won't do, but both sites have gone through the process. In Pennington County, it was very difficult to talk them into doing that because they are ACA accredited. And they said, well, we go through the entire accreditation process and we do everything down to what's the temperature in my staff fridge. And I said, you just have to understand that the conditions of confinement assessment through JDI isn't just looking at, what the lighting looks like or how many times you have somebody come in and check the fire extinguisher. This is about the experience that kids are experiencing in detention. Do they, how many times do they get visits, how many times do they get phone calls, etc. So both sites have actually made some changes and have had positive feedback from the kids that are in the facility. So that both sites have stated that the conditions of confinement have been positive. There's also new standards coming out with the PREA regulations, in addition to the current standards as well. That will be helpful. Here is a matrix. I know it's really hard to see, but it's really the go-to guide for JDI. Talks about what's the best practice model, what tools you can use, and that all of the things start and end with the DUS, the detention realization study, and the system assessment. Those are the two first keys that you have to go to before you ever start JDAI. And really, what's nice about these best practice in this matrix is that you can really identify what steps you need to take and which of the 8 core strategies to focus on. And that is it for my presentation. Does anybody have any questions? We do. It really hasn't had an impact on the numbers because both sites have decided that we really wanted to see how the implementation of the risk assessment instrument, how the alternative implementation programs, and how the case processing has had an impact before we delve into specific disproportionate minority contact concerns. So that's what both sites are working on right now, and both sites have a work plan. I know in Minnehaha County they're working on doing some community reach out and community engagement and identifying how do we build more programming that are specific to the kids. And then in Pennington County they're working on data and trying to get better data. Because one of the problems in Pennington County is their data systems didn't talk, and so they weren't really gathering as much data accurately as they wanted. So they're still at both of the very beginning stages of that. The risk assessment tool is actually a national tool that's through a national presenter who has done every single risk assessment instrument. So it doesn't have that bias. It's all about the facts of the case, like what's their presenting offense, what's their adjudication history. Right. We're still identifying that process, and that's one thing that the disproportionate minority contact work groups are working on, is looking at all of the data and what does it mean, and looking at it through a racial equity lens to see if you're right, if we should tweak the tool a little bit, or implement different alternatives, or have a different case process specific to the that we have in our state. But right now we're still in the very, very beginning stages of that. And so they wanted to make sure that the 8 core strategies, and by implementing, the rest of them, the objective risk assessment tool that I talked about, had an effect first before kind of going up the tree and finding the next lowest hanging fruit. That's one thing that JDA talks about, is you look at what's the lowest hanging fruit, what do you work on first, what's the best first layer of the onion to peel back. And so we're just trying to get back down to the core of the onion.
I can speak to it slightly. I was in a meeting where the numbers were presented in the last couple of years, and you're right about obviously there's a huge disproportionate minority contact, but especially with American kids, as we all know. And everyone agrees that that's a major issue. And so there's a disproportionate minority contact / confinement group exists. And the county decided to put major effort into that. And there's been monthly meetings in the last couple months, and they have hired last month a manager that makes Melissa Buffalo. She has an office at the courthouse on the 5th floor. And so she's only been in it for about a month, but it is a major issue. And when we were creating the risk assessment tool, one of the options is to release to a third. But we all know that sometimes you've got a 12-year-old vehicle and something that's not ready. It might have to be an alter that. But it's a caregiver, and it's where he lives. And so the agency has been very open to, the old rule was file for only, now they're releasing to INT with the appropriate, they don't have to have a paper or anything, but phone call, some information that's in there, and then that person has to sign off that they'll actually come to court. Things work really, really well. Of course, there were naysayers that said, they won't show up, especially with the release that she talked about. Additional release. A kid gets arrested at 1 a.m. They don't need to stay there, but there's enough concerns that they say, okay, well, agree to come to agency tomorrow for a hearing, so the judge can see you at 1:45. You would believe the last person would go like, yeah, right, we're going to show up. But we've been doing this now for about 6 months, so it probably happened 50 times in that. Everyone has shown up. So it's really been great, but there is room for the opinion that there is like that, but you're right to investigation.
And in both sites, there's a work group that's currently active and trying to figure out what's the next steps. Logically. Go ahead.
Sorry, I couldn't really hear anything. Questions to Mr. Larson or the response really, but am I to understand that since 2010, that's when it started, right? The pilot program. And Pennington County doesn't have data regarding racial.
They do. They just don't have historical data. We started collecting the appropriate data, but with the transition of programming between one agency, one program to another, it didn't translate correctly or appropriately. And then in one situation, they had a couple interns that came in, and one wrote Native American as N/A, another one wrote Native American as NA, and we don't know which was which. So we're working on that appropriate data collection to be able to look at the facts accurately before we make any decisions.
My only other question was, things are going well. I heard that Lucille per capita, South Dakota still has the most people detentions.
Right, and that's because the last statistics were in 2011. So we're hoping for the next round we will not be number one, or at least, down to 5 or something like that. But I can tell you that both sites went live in 2012, in January of 2012 with all of their programming. In 2011, we saw a decrease anyway because people were talking about it and the philosophical switch kind of happened. So it kind of had a residual effect on the numbers even in 2011, but 2012 is when both sites really started. Go ahead.
So this happens pre-detention hearing.
Right.
And so the kids are released pre-detention hearing?
It's based on the risk assessment instrument.
Okay, potentially.
Yes.
And how long are they in, how, while this is all this is being processed, would you say?
While the risk assessment instrument's being done?
Yeah.
Most sites it takes less than 15 minutes to do the risk assessment instrument, and then the law enforcement officer will go. One thing I didn't mention is both sites have implemented what's called a reception center, and it's basically an alternative intake screen and sort center. In Pennington, that's actually in the detention center because they have the non-secure front half of the facility, and it's ran by Lutheran Social Services. In Minnehaha County, it's in the VOA building, and it's run by VOA staff. So that's kind of where they can stay.
Well, and I guess the other question would be, just a past experience from that city, is there a change in the mentality of the officers as to, taking everything to the city versus maybe even bypassing that stuff and, depending on the offense, maybe just taking it straight home? Is it bad? Have you seen any changes in that?
Yes, law enforcement officers always have their discretion, and that's always been a discussion, and that JDI is not going to take law enforcement discretion away of being able to have them just take them home, and then taking them to having a case flow through the state's attorney's office for a legal sufficiency review. They've actually really enjoyed the reception center bill, because those kids that they can't get a hold of the parent for 4 hours, that kid can sit in the reception center, sit on a couch, and eat a Pop-Tart and hang out until their parent can come pick them up. When they were never appropriate to be sitting in secure detention booking, but that was the only option available. So that reception center has been a really good resource. And one thing that the reception center staff do as well is when the parents come, they kind of create a safety plan for those kids. They provide resources to the family. They kind of figure out what's going on. If the kid's running away, where are they running away? Where are they running away to or from? Is it just a kid behavior that they got mad because their parent took something away? Or was it a serious thing that's going on? So we're being able to not only figure all that information out through the expediter, placement coordinator process, but also through the reception center.
Where's the reception center located in Rapid City?
In Rapid City, it's in the detention center facility. It's just in the non-secure part of the facility. It's called the Arise Youth Center, and it's run by Lutheran Social Services. And in Sioux Falls, it's at one of the VOA buildings. I can't remember which.
VOA North.
VOA.
Rapid City.
Oh, there you go. So both of them have nonprofit agencies working in the reception center capacity. Go ahead.
In Beetle County, in the last 4 weeks, the state's attorney's office has promoted a California company's diversion program where the family, the child pays $450 to enter into this online responsibility training. What is the cost to the families with your program, and how does that fit with this online responsibility training?
This process is after diversion. So if you think about the whole system on a block, diversion is the house over here, and then JDAI focuses on the kids that aren't appropriate for diversion, but are going through the system, through the court system, as a formal charge. The programming, the alternatives to detention aren't at a cost to the families because it's a county responsibility. So the county is responsible for the detention center, the county is responsible for the alternatives as well. That's where that cost reallocation comes from versus the cost savings, because you can reallocate some of those costs, and both sites have reallocated some of those detention center costs to open and to have VOA and LSFs run their alternative programs. To answer your question. Thank you. There's a statewide steering committee that's actually meeting next week, and then there's a visit at the end of the month to New Jersey, which is a model state site for JDAI, to learn about what does it mean to expand, what does it mean to, as the NAPC Foundation calls it, scale up. We can't replicate our sites because we can't take what happened in Sioux Falls and Pennington and go to the other sites in South Dakota. We just can't do that. They don't have as many resources, the experience is different, the kids are different. So we're looking at expanding. So how do we expand the knowledge that Minnehaha and Pennington County have gained into other sites? Now, how that's going to happen and what sites are next, I don't know. That will be a decision of that statewide steering committee that's made up of people from all across the state who have played key roles and can make that decision not only on a Pennington County, Minnehaha County basis, but what's best for the state of South Dakota.